There is something about a national forest that makes you feel small in the best possible way, until it doesn't. You park your car at a trailhead, you strap on a pack, you walk into the trees, and within minutes the parking lot disappears behind you, the sound of the highway fades out, and you are alone with the wind moving through the pines and the creak of branches overhead. And for a while, maybe a long while, that feeling is exactly what you came for. Peace. Quiet. The particular kind of freedom that only exists when civilization stops pressing against you from every direction. I used to live for that feeling. I grew up camping. My dad had a saying, "The forest doesn't judge you." He meant it as a comfort, as an invitation. He meant that out there, beyond the trailhead, beyond the ranger station and the posted rules and the carefully maintained fire rings, you could just exist. You could breathe. You could be a person without all the noise. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't completely right. The forest doesn't judge you. That part is true, but the forest also doesn't protect you. It doesn't care what your intentions are. It doesn't care that you're just there for the weekend, that you've told people where you're going, that you've done everything right. The forest is neutral in a way that civilization never quite prepares you for, and that neutrality cuts both ways. Because for every story of a hiker who walked in and walked out changed for the better, there is another story, a quieter story, one that didn't make the news or the hiking blogs or the Instagram posts with the perfectly lit golden hour photographs. A story about what happened after dark, or off the trail, or when someone else was out there in those trees at the same time as you, someone who was counting on that neutrality, counting on the isolation, counting on the fact that in a national forest, help is a very long way away. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 6 of those stories. They were sent to me by real people, people who went into the woods the same way you or I would, with a tent and some trail mix and the best of intentions, and came out carrying something they couldn't leave behind. Some of them still can't sleep with the windows open. Some of them don't camp anymore at all. One of them told me she drives an extra 45 minutes out of her way every single day so she doesn't have to pass the forest road where it happened to her. I want you to stay comfortable while you listen to this. I want you to feel safe. But I also want you to remember these stories, because every single one of them started exactly the way your next camping trip might start, with good weather, good company, and absolutely no reason to be afraid. Let's get into it. Let me tell you something about the Willamette National Forest that the travel blogs don't mention. It is enormous in a way that maps don't communicate. On paper, it looks manageable. A big green rectangle in central Oregon, threaded with rivers and dotted with campsites and cut through by roads that are, technically, accessible by a regular vehicle if you're patient enough and you don't mind your car making sounds it has never made before. In reality, it is almost 3 million acres of dense, old-growth Douglas fir, hemlock, and cedar, trees so tall and so old that standing among them feels like standing in a cathedral that was built before humans existed. The understory is thick. The ground is soft from decades of fallen needles. Sound travels strangely in there. Not loudly, more like sounds get absorbed, swallowed up, so that the snap of a branch 30 feet away sounds like it's right next to you. And someone talking in a normal voice 20 feet behind you on the trail can be genuinely difficult to hear. I did not know any of this when I went there in the summer of 2019. I was 26. I'd been camping a handful of times, always with other people, always at developed campgrounds with bathrooms and rangers and fire rings with metal grates. This was supposed to be my first real solo trip. 3 nights, 7 miles in on the Waldo Lake Trail, with enough food and water, and the kind of cheerful overconfidence that only people who have never been truly alone in the wilderness can sustain for long. The first day was perfect. I mean that. Perfect sky, perfect temperature, trail conditions excellent. I set up my tent at an established campsite about a mile from the lake, cooked pasta from a boil-in bag pouch, and sat outside watching the light fade through the trees until the mosquitoes got bad enough to drive me inside. I fell asleep to the sound of an owl somewhere far off and woke up the next morning feeling like a different, better version of myself. The second day I did a loop, hiked up to the lake, ate lunch on a flat rock at the water's edge, watched a bald eagle circle for about 20 minutes. On my way back, I passed another camper, a man, maybe 50, gray beard, expensive-looking hiking poles, and we exchanged the friendly nod that hikers give each other. The one that means I see you, I acknowledge you, I am not a threat and neither are you, and we kept moving in our separate directions. That was at around 2 in the afternoon. By 6, I was back at my campsite. I made dinner, cleaned up carefully the way you're supposed to, bare country, bare box, all food stored, no exceptions, and set up my camp chair to watch the evening come in. The forest was doing that thing it does at dusk when the light gets long and golden, and the shadows between the trees deepen faster than you expect them to. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the tree line, maybe 40 yards from my campsite, just at the edge of where the trees got thick enough that the shadows swallowed detail. He was facing me. He was still. Now I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that in these kinds of stories, the person always says they saw a figure in the trees and immediately knew something was wrong. And I want to be honest with you about what I actually felt in that moment, which was nothing much. A mild curiosity. Another hiker, maybe. Someone passing through or taking a break or trying to get a look at my campsite to see if there was room nearby. I waved. He didn't wave back. That was when the mild curiosity upgraded to mild unease. Not fear, not yet, just the faint notch up in alertness that your body produces when something doesn't match your expectations. I lowered my hand. I kept watching him. He kept watching me. The light was getting worse. I went inside my tent and zipped it up. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was the same man with the hiking poles. Maybe he'd looped back around. Maybe he'd set up camp nearby and was just checking out his surroundings. Maybe I'd misread the whole thing and he had waved back and I just hadn't seen it in the fading light. I told myself all of that, and I almost believed it. What I couldn't quite explain away was this. He hadn't been moving. Not toward me, not away from me, not any direction. He'd been standing the way you stand when you're watching something. Patient. Still. The way you stand when you've been standing there for a while and you plan to keep standing there. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to every sound the forest made and categorizing them. Wind, branch, animal, wind, branch, wind. Until somewhere around 3 in the morning I must have dropped off, because the next thing I knew it was light. Here's the part I haven't told many people. When I unzipped my tent and stepped outside the next morning, I found footprints. Not at the tree line where I'd seen him. Closer. 20 feet from my tent door, in a soft patch of ground near the fire ring, there was a clear set of boot prints. Large, adult, facing my tent. They came from the direction of the tree line and they went nowhere. There was no second set leading away. Just the prints facing my tent, as if whoever made them had stood there long enough to settle into the soft ground and then simply ceased to exist. I packed up my campsite in 11 minutes. That is not an exaggeration. 11 minutes to break down a tent, stuff a sleeping bag, cram everything into my pack in the complete wrong order so that the heaviest things were at the top and the frame was digging into my lower back within the first half mile, and I did not care. I walked out of there as fast as I have ever walked anywhere. I didn't see anyone on the trail. I made it to the trailhead in under 2 hours. I drove home without stopping. I reported what I found to the ranger station. The ranger I spoke to was professional and careful and didn't seem surprised, which was itself unsettling. She took my information, thanked me for reporting it, and told me they'd have someone check the area. I never heard back. I don't know if that means nothing was found, or if it means something was found that they didn't want to tell me about. I have not been back to the Willamette. I probably won't go back. What I keep coming back to, years later, is not the figure at the tree line, weird as that was. It's the footprints. It's the fact that someone was close enough to my tent in the middle of the night that I could have unzipped the door and touched them. And they stood there in the dark, in a national forest in the middle of nowhere, and they just watched. What do you do with that? How do you fold that back into normal life and move on? I'm still figuring it out. My wife Melissa and I had been married for 3 years when we decided to do the anniversary trip we'd been putting off since our honeymoon. A week in the Cherokee National Forest in eastern Tennessee. Real hiking, real camping, the kind of trip neither of us had done since we were kids, and which we'd been romanticizing so thoroughly that by the time we actually pulled off the interstate and onto the forest road, we had approximately 6 months' worth of expectation riding on every mile. The first few days were everything we'd hoped for. Cherokee is stunning in October. The hardwoods are turning. The air is that specific cold clean you only get in the southern Appalachians, and the crowds that pack the place in summer are gone. We had whole sections of trail to ourselves. We saw deer. We saw what Melissa insisted was a black bear, and what I am still gently skeptical about. We cooked over fire, slept 9 hours a night, and rediscovered, as married couples sometimes need to, that we actually like each other quite a lot. The trouble started on the 4th night. We decided to drive out of the forest to a small town about 20 miles east to have a real dinner, a restaurant, chairs, menus, the whole indulgence. We had a great time. We lingered over dessert. By the time we were heading back to our campsite, it was close to 10:30, full dark, and the temperature had dropped another 15 degrees. I was driving. Melissa was navigating with the paper map we'd gotten at the ranger station, because cell service in that part of Tennessee is essentially decorative. You have one bar of it just long enough to make you think you could use it if you needed to. We'd been on the forest road for about 20 minutes when Melissa said, "This doesn't look right." Now I want to contextualize what "this doesn't look right" means on a forest road at 10:30 at night, because it's not a subtle thing. When you're on a maintained forest road, even a rough one, there are markers. Post markers for roads, trail markers at intersections, the occasional yellow reflector on a post or tree. There's a regularity to it, even in the dark. What we were on had none of that. The road had gotten narrower without our noticing exactly when. The pavement, if there had been pavement, I was no longer sure, had given way to packed dirt, and then to something more like a two-track, which is the polite term for 2-tire ruts through grass and brush with a strip of vegetation down the middle. The trees were closer to the car. There were no markers of any kind. And when I put the car in park and looked at the road ahead in the headlights, I could see that it was going down, a steep, winding descent into what I had no way to assess. "We must have taken a wrong turn," I said. "When?" Melissa said. Neither of us could answer that. We'd been watching the road. We'd been following the map. But the map, we realized, didn't show every 2-track logging road that spiderwebbed through the forest interior, and somehow we had ended up on one. I started to turn around. This is harder than it sounds on a narrow 2-track. I was doing a 7-point turn in the dark, inching back and forth, when the headlights swept across something at the side of the road. A truck. Older model, domestic, dark-colored, parked with its nose in the brush like it had pulled off in a hurry or been there long enough that the brush had grown around it. No plates visible. No one in the cab. "Keep going," Melissa said. Her voice had changed. I know my wife's voice in every register, and this was her "don't ask questions" voice. The one she uses when she's already 3 steps ahead of a situation I haven't fully processed. I kept going. Finished the turn, got us pointed back the way we'd come. We got about a 1/4 mile down the road when we saw the man. He was walking toward us, down the middle of the road. He was carrying something, a bag maybe, or a bundle. It was hard to tell in the headlights, and when the light hit him, he didn't slow down or move to the side or do any of the things a person walks into headlights does. He just kept walking, toward us, at the same pace. I slowed the car. "Don't stop," Melissa said. "He's in the road. Go around him." There was no going around him. The road was too narrow. I brought the car to a stop maybe 30 feet from him, and he stopped too. And for a moment we all just existed in this awful frozen tableau, us behind the windshield, him in the headlights, nobody moving. He raised one hand, not waving, more like asking us to stop, which we already had, or maybe like acknowledging us, or maybe like something else entirely that I didn't have a category for. I laid on the horn, long hard blast. He didn't flinch. He lowered his hand. He stepped slowly, with a deliberateness that felt like a decision rather than a reaction, off the road and into the brush at the side. I drove. Fast. Faster than was smart on a one-lane dirt track at night. Melissa had the map in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. She was turned in her seat watching out the back window until the darkness swallowed the road behind us and she couldn't see anything anymore. We found the forest road. We found our campsite. We did not talk about it much that night. The next morning, in daylight, with coffee and the specific sanity that daylight provides, we tried to reconstruct what had happened. The wrong turn we couldn't explain. The truck with no plates. The man who didn't react to headlights. The fact that he'd been walking toward us from the direction of the truck at 10:30 at night on an unmarked road in the middle of the Cherokee National Forest. Melissa said, "I think he was waiting for a car to stop." She didn't say what she thought was going to happen if a car had stopped. We both understood, I think, that there was only one reason to stand in the middle of a dark forest road and wait for cars at that hour, and it wasn't anything we wanted to spend too much time thinking about. We broke camp that morning and drove home a day early. We told our families we'd gotten our fill of camping earlier than expected, which was, in its own way, completely true. We've talked about going back to Cherokee. We might. The forest itself was beautiful, but we have a rule now: we're in the campsite before dark. Whatever the dinner plans are, whatever we feel like doing, we are parked and settled before the sun goes down. Rules feel good when they come from somewhere real. Rules feel good when they mean you're paying attention. I'm submitting this anonymously because some of the details involve people who don't know I'm telling this story, and also because what I'm going to describe involves a law enforcement interaction that I have never fully been able to make sense of. And I don't want my name attached to something that might read as an accusation when I'm genuinely not sure what I witnessed. Background: I was doing a solo through hike of a section of the Bob Marshall Wilderness in northwest Montana in August of 2018. The Bob Marshall, the Bob, locals call it, is one of the largest wilderness complexes in the contiguous United States. It's over 1 million acres. There are no roads in the interior. The nearest anything, once you're past the trailhead, can be 20, 30, 40 miles away. People come from all over the world to hike it precisely because of that remoteness. It's the real thing, in a way that a lot of national forests aren't anymore. I had done my research. I had my permits. I had a satellite communicator in addition to my regular navigation gear, because I'm not reckless, remote, and prepared can coexist. I was 12 days into what was meant to be a 16-day trip. On the morning of day 12, I packed up camp and was on the trail by 7. I was in a section of the wilderness I hadn't been in before, moving through a valley with a river on my left and a tailless field on my right, climbing up toward a ridge I planned to cross by mid-afternoon. About 2 miles into the day, I came across a camp. It was set back from the trail by maybe 30 yards, just inside a stand of lodgepole pine. It was clearly occupied. A tent was up. There was gear laid out in the organized way of someone mid-trip rather than just arrived or just leaving. And there was a fire ring with ash in it that looked recent, but there was no one there. I didn't think much of it. Campers wander. They hike off for the day and come back. I kept moving. 2 miles later, I found another camp. This one was different. It was less organized, gear scattered, not laid out deliberately. A tarp rigged awkwardly between trees, not the way an experienced camper would rig it. A single boot sitting on its side next to the fire ring. One boot, not two. and the fire ring had coals in it, still warm when I held my hand over it. Still no one. A single boot. That's what I kept coming back to as I walked. You don't lose one boot. You take your boots off together. You put them on together. A single boot sitting alone next to a fire ring means either someone walked away from that camp in one boot, which doesn't make sense, or the boot was left behind as someone left quickly, which also doesn't entirely make sense. Unless something had happened very fast. I used my satellite communicator to send a message to my check-in contact. I described what I'd found. I kept moving. That afternoon, coming down from the ridge, I encountered two people coming up. A man and a woman, both in Forest Service green, with the patches and the bearing of rangers. They stopped me. The interaction was professional and at first entirely normal. They asked where I'd come from, checked my permit, asked if I'd seen anything unusual. I told them about the camps, the scattered gear, the single boot, the warm fire ring. Here is where it gets strange. The female ranger wrote things down, but the male ranger, who had been quiet just listening, looked at her when I said the word boot. Not at me, at her. Some kind of communication passed between them, not a spoken thing, a look. She thanked me. She asked me if I had seen any people in that area, specifically. Had I seen anyone following the trail north versus south? Had I seen anyone who appeared to be in distress? Had I seen any vehicles off trail or anything that didn't fit the normal hiking picture? I hadn't, I said so. She said they were aware of the situation, and it was being handled. What situation? I said. We have a report of a missing camper in this section, she said. And then, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this 100 times, she said. I'd recommend you increase your pace today. Try to make the next ranger station before dark. Not have a nice trip. Not stay safe out there in the general way that rangers sign off. Specifically, increase your pace, make the station before dark. I did exactly that. I pushed 7 miles in the afternoon, which is a lot on rough terrain with a full pack. I made the ranger station at 6:30 with about an hour of light to spare. The ranger at the station was different. Didn't seem to know what I was referring to when I mentioned the 2 rangers I'd encountered on the trail. He took my information, took my contact details, thanked me. I finished my hike 2 days later and drove home. I've done research since then. I have found no news reports about a missing camper in the Bob Marshall in August 2018, which either means they found the person and it was resolved quietly, or it means it was never reported publicly, which has its own implications. What I come back to is that look, ranger to ranger, when I said the word boot. That look meant something. It meant, this person just gave us a piece of information that fits with something we already know, and what they already knew I was not going to be told. I'm not accusing those rangers of anything. I think they were doing their jobs, which sometimes involves not creating panic among hikers in a remote wilderness. I think they were protecting me in a way by telling me to move fast and get to the station. I believe that. But I also think about that camper, the one with the single boot, the warm fire and the scattered gear and the absence where a person should have been. I think about them more than I probably should. There were 4 of us. Me, my best friend Jade, her boyfriend Marcus, and Marcus's college friend Theo, who none of us knew very well but who seemed perfectly normal in the several weeks of group chat planning that preceded the trip. Rio Grande National Forest, southern Colorado, 3 nights in early September. Marcus had done this section before. He was our navigator and trip leader, which the rest of us were grateful for because it meant we could just follow someone and enjoy it without the cognitive overhead of route finding. Everything went fine for 2 days. On the second night, we set up camp in a flat, open area about half a mile off the main trail, near a creek that was low but running. Good site. Sheltered from wind. Fire ring from previous campers. We cooked, we talked. We did the satisfying thing where you watch the fire die down and the sky go properly dark, and you count stars and argue about whether you can actually see the Milky Way or if you're just convincing yourselves. We went to bed around 11. I'm a light sleeper, always have been. I wake up at sounds that other people sleep through, which has been a minor inconvenience my entire life, and which, on this particular night, possibly mattered. I woke up at somewhere around 2 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. By the time I was conscious enough to notice I was awake, whatever sound had done it was already gone. I lay there in the dark in that particular silence of an autumn night in the high country, and I did the mental inventory. Tent zipped, sleeping bag warm, Jade breathing evenly next to me, fire dead outside. Everything fine. Then I heard the voice. It was a child's voice. High-pitched, thin, the specific timbre of a young child, 4, 5 years old, something in that range. It was coming from somewhere outside the tent, maybe 20 yards off toward the creek. And it was saying one thing, repeating it slowly, with a pause between each repetition. Help me, help me, help me. I'm going to be very honest with you about what happened inside my body when I heard that. There was an immediate, overwhelming instinct to unzip the tent and go toward the sound. That instinct was so strong it was almost physical, a kind of forward lean, a pull. A child's voice saying, "Help me," in the middle of the night triggers something very primal and very insistent, and the fact that it was 2 in the morning in the middle of a national forest didn't override it. If anything, the wrongness of it made the pull stronger. I grabbed Jade's arm. She woke up. I put my hand over her mouth before she could say anything, not because I thought we were about to be attacked, but because I needed her to hear it. I needed confirmation that I was hearing what I thought I was hearing. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Help me, help me. Jade went rigid. I felt it through her arm. Now we were both awake, both listening, both doing the same mental work. Child's voice. Middle of the night. National Forest. What is the explanation that is not the bad one? Somebody's kid who wandered from a nearby camp. A lost child. A child in genuine trouble. But there were no other camps nearby. We'd checked when we set up solo site, no one else visible. And a child who was genuinely lost and frightened doesn't sound like that. A genuinely lost child is louder, more ragged, less rhythmic. What we were hearing was steady, paced, repeating on almost exactly the same interval like a recording. I heard Marcus whisper something from the other tent. He'd heard it too. The voice stopped. Total silence, the creek, the wind. We lay completely still for a very long time. I don't know exactly how long, 30 minutes, maybe more. Jade was gripping my hand hard enough to leave marks. The voice did not come back. In the morning, when there was enough light to see by, Marcus and Theo walked the area around camp in a 100-yard radius. They found nothing. No footprints in the soft ground by the creek beyond our own. No camp. No signs of any recent human presence other than ours. When we got back to cell service and did some searching, we found references to something outdoors people call luring. A tactic that has been documented in enough incident reports that it has a name. The idea is simple and terrible. Play a sound designed to make a person exit their shelter. Distress sounds. Animal sounds. A child's voice. We don't know that's what happened to us. I want to be clear about that. We don't know. It could have been something else entirely. Sound traveling strangely across water. A bird call that doesn't sound like a bird when you're half asleep. Some other explanation I haven't thought of. But I know what I heard. And I know that every nerve in my body told me to unzip that tent and walk toward the creek in the dark. And the only thing that stopped me was the wrongness of the rhythm. The mechanical, metronomic quality of it. 3 words pause, 3 words pause, 3 words pause. We do not unzip the tent for sounds at night anymore. Whatever it is can wait until morning. Jade has a rule now. If it's an emergency, it'll still be an emergency at dawn. If it's not still an emergency at dawn, it wasn't what it seemed. That rule has served us well. I hope it serves you too. My grandfather built a cabin in the Ottawa National Forest in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in 1962. Not a Park Service cabin, not a rental, a private cabin on a parcel of private land that is surrounded on 3 sides by National Forest, which is one of those property arrangements that exists in the Up, and that my grandfather probably couldn't have afforded in any other part of the country. He built it by hand, him and my great-uncle and a guy from town whose name nobody remembers anymore. It's a simple structure, 2 rooms, wood stove, no running water until my dad installed a hand pump in the 80s, no electricity still. We've been going there my whole life. My parents went there before I was born. My grandfather's ashes are scattered in the creek that runs behind it. I say all this to establish that I know that property. I know it the way you know a place you've been going since before you could walk. I know which floorboards creak. I know how the door sounds in wet weather versus dry weather. I know the particular quality of silence in the woods around it late at night, which is dense and complete and different from any other quiet I've ever known. So when I tell you that something was wrong the moment I pulled up to the cabin in September of 2020, I want you to understand that this assessment came from a lifetime of accumulated knowledge about that specific place, and not from general unease or paranoia. Something was wrong. I had driven up alone pandemic year solo trip, wanted the space and the silence. It was late afternoon when I arrived, low sun coming through the trees at a flat angle. Everything looked normal at a glance. The cabin was standing. The door was closed. The wood pile was where it always was. And then I noticed the fire ring. We have a fire ring about 20 feet from the cabin door. It's been there for 40 years, same ring, same placement. There are usually some old ashes in it and maybe a few pieces of half-burned wood. What was in it when I pulled up was a recently used fire, ash still gray and fluffy, not compacted by rain, with pieces of burned material in it that I didn't recognize as wood. I sat in my car for a while. This is something I've heard recommended as general safety practice, and it's something I've now done naturally and instinctively ever since. Before you get out of your vehicle in an unfamiliar or potentially compromised situation, take a minute. Look around. Let your eyes adjust and your brain catch up to your surroundings. I looked, I did not see anyone. I did not hear anything. The forest was quiet. I got out of the car and walked to the cabin door. It was unlocked. We always leave it unlocked. The Up has a tradition of this. Trails and cabins and outbuildings left open because if someone's caught out in weather or genuinely in trouble, a locked door between them and shelter is a death sentence. It's a cultural thing. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just telling you that the unlocked door was not unusual and did not, on its own, mean anything. What was inside the cabin is what told me something was wrong. Someone had been living there. Not trashing the place, not vandalism, not a break-in in the traditional sense, more like an extended stay. There was food in the kitchen, canned goods that weren't ours, arranged neatly on the shelf. There was a bedroll on the floor of the sleeping room, military surplus style, old but functional. There was a change of clothing folded on the chair. And on the table, there was a small stack of papers, not documents, not anything identifying, just papers with handwritten notes on them that I did not read closely because something told me not to. I left. I got back in my car and I drove to the nearest town, 40 minutes, and I called the county sheriff. The deputy who came back to the cabin with me was thorough and professional, and also, I could tell, unsurprised in the specific way that law enforcement in rural areas sometimes isn't surprised by certain things. He photographed everything. He bagged the papers. He told me the cabin appeared to have been occupied for some time, his phrasing, and that this was not an entirely uncommon situation in that part of the forest. I asked what he meant by that. He explained that the Ottawa National Forest, like many large wilderness areas, periodically has issues with people establishing what he called unauthorized long-term camps, people who come in and stay, sometimes for months, using private structures or building their own. Sometimes they're people in crisis. Sometimes they're people who are hiding. Sometimes, he said carefully, it's both. Do you know who was here? I asked. Not yet, he said. He recommended I stay in town for a few nights while they looked into it. I took his advice. I stayed at a motel in Iron River for 3 nights. On the 4th day, he called me and told me I could return. The situation had been resolved. He wouldn't say more than that. I went back to the cabin. The bedroll was gone. The canned goods were gone. The papers were gone. Everything that didn't belong had been removed, and the cabin was as it should be, minus some firewood from the pile and a week of my grandfather's peace. I stayed for 4 days. I slept with the wood stove going and the door barred, which my grandfather never would have done, and which felt like a kind of apology to his memory even as I did it. I don't know who was in that cabin. I don't know how long they were there. I don't know if they watched me arrive. I don't know if resolved means arrested or relocated or something else entirely. What I know is this: if you have a remote property, check it before you go inside. Park and look. Pay attention to the fire ring. Look at the door. Look at the windows. Give yourself the 30 seconds of assessment that my grandfather never needed to take and that I now take every single time without exception. The forest is a good place to hide. That's true for you when you need peace, and it's true for other people when they need something else. 6 guys, 1 long weekend. Shasta Trinity National Forest in Northern California. Bachelor party. The groom's idea, he was an outdoors guy, had done this trail before, wanted something real before the wedding rather than Las Vegas or a bar crawl or whatever the default is. 5 of us were at least nominally on board. The 6th, a guy named Bryce, had never camped in his life and spent the drive up from Sacramento cataloging his concerns about bears in a way that was funny for approximately the first hour, and then less so. We got on the trail Friday afternoon, 11 miles in over 2 days, to a lake where we planned to spend Saturday night and then back out Sunday. Straightforward, well-marked trail, conditions good. The groom, Danny, we called him Dan the Man for reasons too convoluted to explain, had done this loop twice and led us confidently for the whole first day. We made camp at the lake by 5 Friday, had a fire going by 7, and by 9 we were the kind of tired and content that only a full day of hiking produces. Saturday was perfect. We fished. We swam briefly and in a way that involved a lot of male bravado and immediate retreat due to the water temperature. We ate food that tasted better than it had any right to because we were hungry in the pure, uncomplicated way you get hungry on a trail. We told stories. Bryce stopped complaining about bears and started complaining about his sleeping pad instead, which was an improvement. We went to bed late Saturday. Too late. We'd lost track of time and the fire had been too good, and by the time we were in our tents it was nearly 1 in the morning and we had an 11-mile hike starting in something like 6 hours. Dan set an alarm for 6. What woke us at 4:30 was not the alarm. I'll be honest about what I remember and what I'm less sure about, because 6 people experienced this, and we've compared notes many times and we don't entirely agree on the sequence or some of the details. What we all agree on is this: we were woken up by a sound. A loud sound coming from somewhere above the camp, up the slope, in the trees on the hillside that rose steeply above where we'd pitched our tents. What the sound was is where we diverge. Dan says it was like something large moving through brush, crashing and snapping branches, moving fast. Bryce says it was a scream, a human scream. Marcus, different Marcus from the earlier story, this is coincidence, says it was a single sound, one impact, like something heavy hitting the ground. I was awake and out of my tent before I'd fully processed what I'd heard. I don't know why. Adrenaline makes its own decisions. I had my headlamp on and I was standing in the camp in my base layers, and so were 2 other guys, and we were all looking up at the slope in the dark. We saw nothing, heard nothing. The forest above us was still. We stood there for probably 4 or 5 minutes, and then Dan said quietly, "Get your boots on, we're leaving." No debate. 6 people who had been planning to sleep 2 more hours were packed and moving down the trail in 40 minutes. We didn't make a fire. We didn't eat breakfast. We hiked by headlamp in the dark, and by the time we hit the trailhead, the sky was just starting to go gray. We never identified the sound. Dan, who had done this trail twice, said he'd never heard anything like it on either previous trip. The general consensus in the flat morning light of the parking lot was that it had probably been a bear or some other large animal. California has mountain lions as well. There are a lot of things in those mountains that can make alarming sounds. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. When we got to the parking lot, there was one other vehicle in it, a white pickup truck that hadn't been there when we'd arrived Friday. And there was a man sitting in the cab. He'd been watching us come out of the trail. When we got to our cars and started loading gear, he got out of his truck. He was friendly, completely normal seeming, asked us how the trail was, said he was heading in for a solo overnight, asked if we'd seen any bears. We said no. He nodded, said thanks, and started toward the trailhead. He was carrying almost nothing, a small day pack. No tent visible, no sleeping system, no food bag. At 6 in the morning to do an overnight on a trail that was 11 miles into water. We looked at each other. Dan called after him, "You going all the way to the lake?" The man turned and smiled. "Depends on what I find," he said. And then he walked into the trees. We drove home. We talked about it for most of the drive, the sound at 4:30, the man with the small pack. Depends on what I find. The way the whole sequence felt like chapters in the same story, even if we couldn't connect them. Maybe they weren't connected. Probably they weren't connected. These are the things we tell ourselves in the car, in the daylight, with the highway unreeling ahead of us and a hot coffee in the cup holder. Dan got married 6 weeks later. At the reception, someone made a toast about the bachelor party that left out the part where we fled a campsite in the dark at 4:30 in the morning. The part where a man with an empty pack walked into the forest to find something. He's been married 4 years now. They have a daughter, he still camps. But he told me once, about a year after that trip, that he always wakes up at 4:30. Doesn't matter where he is, doesn't matter what time he went to bed. 4:30, he's awake, lying in the dark, listening. "For what?" I asked. He thought about it for a moment. "For whatever made that sound," he said, "so I know what it is before I have to decide what to do about it." 6 stories. 6 sets of people who went into the trees on ordinary days with ordinary intentions and came back carrying something extra. Something they hadn't packed and couldn't put down. I want to sit with you in that for a moment, if that's okay, because I think there's something important in the specific texture of what all these people experienced, something beyond just scary things happen in the woods. All of them are careful to say, probably, maybe, I don't know for sure. They're not claiming certainty about what they encountered or what it meant. They are claiming the experience itself, the footprints, the wrong road, the missing camper, the voice in the dark, the cabin that wasn't empty, the sound on the slope, and they're sitting with the not knowing in a way that I find genuinely braver than certainty would be. Because certainty is easier, isn't it? It's easier to say it was definitely a mountain lion, or it was definitely just some weird hiker, or there's definitely a normal explanation for all of it. Certainty closes the door and lets you sleep. The people in these stories are all choosing still to leave the door slightly open, because closing it completely would mean deciding that what they experienced doesn't count, that their fear response was wrong, that the thing their nervous system recognized as a threat was nothing. I don't think it was nothing. I think the body knows things before the mind catches up. I think 20,000 years of human evolution built some very specific detection software into our nervous systems, and that software runs best when we let it, and worst when we override it with politeness or rationalization or the reluctance to seem paranoid. Carrie's gut told her to go inside the tent. She went. Melissa's voice changed and Derek listened. The anonymous hiker sent a check-in message before they'd fully decided why. Rachel didn't unzip the tent, even though everything in her wanted to. Paul sat in the car. He looked before he got out. He trusted the wrongness. Dan said we're leaving, and nobody argued. Not one of those decisions was wrong, not a single one. I think about what the alternative looks like in each of those stories. Carrie going out to talk to the figure at the tree line. Derek stopping the car on the dark forest road. Paul going inside the cabin without looking first. Rachel stepping out into the night toward the creek. I think about those alternatives the way you think about a near miss on the highway, with a particular cold clarity about how differently things could have gone. Listening to stories like these serves a purpose that goes beyond entertainment, I think. Or maybe it serves entertainment by going beyond it. We consume these stories because they tell us something true about the world, that the places we love to go can also be the places where we're most exposed. That the same isolation that makes the wilderness peaceful makes it dangerous. That the people who are out there with bad intentions know this better than we do, and they plan around it. But the stories also tell us something else. They tell us that people make it out. They tell us that awareness and caution and trusting your gut and telling someone where you're going and having a plan and leaving before dark and not stopping for strangers on forest roads, all of that matters. All of it works. The people who sent me these stories are still here to send them. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not fear, or not only fear. Practical paranoia, which is different. Practical paranoia is fear that you've metabolized into habits. Fear that has made you smarter about where you sit in a restaurant, more attentive on a trail, more deliberate about who you tell your plans to. Fear that has become, over time, something that feels less like an emotion and more like a skill. When you go into the forest, and I hope you do go, because it is worth it, it is still worth it. The owl at midnight and the eagle over the lake and the stars without light pollution are worth every careful precaution you take to enjoy them. Bring these stories with you, not to frighten yourself, to remind yourself that you have excellent internal navigation equipment that evolution spent a long time building, and all you have to do is keep it on and trust the readings. Tell someone where you're going. File a trip plan with the ranger station. Have a satellite communicator if you're going deep. Camp before dark. Don't stop for strangers in the road. Don't unzip the tent for sounds you can't identify. Sit in your car for 30 seconds before you get out. Pay attention to fire rings. And know, really know, not just theoretically know, that the moment something feels wrong, the polite thing to do is leave. You don't owe the forest an explanation. You don't owe a stranger your attention. You don't owe your own stubborn rationalism the benefit of the doubt when your body is already packing up and walking toward the trailhead. The forest is enormous and old and largely indifferent to whether you come back from it or not. That's the truth that lives underneath all 6 of these stories, and it's the truth that makes them matter. You get to care whether you come back. That's the whole job. Stay safe, check in, go home. And if you want to share your own story, if you've been carrying something from a trail or a campsite or a forest road that you've never quite been able to put down, you know where to find me. The comment section is open. I read everything. Until next time.